Israel released footage of a pretty significant tunnel network under Khan Yunis that has a little bit of everything. We've got weapons storage, detention facilities, and living quarters. We have news that the United States has suffered 146 casualties due to enemy fire in Iraq, Syria, and Jordan over the last few months. That is not business as usual. It just isn't. That is a significant uptick. And then we've got some data points released from the Hamas ceasefire proposal. They're asking for a lot. Personal opinion, I think it's dead on arrival. It seems like some of these pieces Israel will never agree upon, but we'll get into that as well. So let's get started. I'm recording this at 9 a.m. Central on Wednesday, February 7th, 2024. Starting with a video released by Israel. Just a few hours ago, they showed a massive tunnel network. Every one of these just huge underground. This one's in Khan Yunis, and we're starting to see some different characteristics. This is about a 3-minute long video. Up north, most of these tunnels were empty. There was nothing in there. It was simply an underground passageway. It looked like a way to move from one location to another. We're starting to see more and more in Khan Yunis specifically that have things like this. We've got food, we've got medical supplies, living quarters, kitchens, things like that, where Hamas likely was spending a lot of time. Now, it's hard to tell from this. This is the middle of a combat operation, or just in the tail end, I should say, after the tunnel's been cleared. There's your bathroom. So it's hard to tell how recently it was occupied. But, you know, people spent a lot of time down here. There's the detention facility. Hard to call that anything else. Other times we've seen some doors like that connect one tunnel to the next. Some weapons, grenades, mines, magazines, and RPGs. We've seen, there you go, one of these doors. We've seen these kind of gated doors before connecting different portions of the tunnel. It's hard to look at those in past videos and say they're definitely detention facilities, but some of the stuff they showed in this video, it's like a room blocked off with that type of door. It's pretty clear what that is. I've always been surprised with the tiling in some of these underground tunnels. You know, again, prior to this, I think the perception, prior to all these videos coming out from Israel, I think the perception was that people were thinking maybe Viet Cong style tunnels, just holes in the dirt, dirt walls, maybe some wood support structures to keep it from collapsing. But when we get down in here, they've made these livable, right? To where people can likely stay underground for significant periods of time. A lot of UNRWA bags. That's the aid agency that was just recently, a bunch of different countries cut off funding following some allegations that I think it was 12 of their members were directly involved in the attacks into Israel on October 7th. Still waiting, actually, for a lot of that intelligence to be made public. I had somebody ask just a few weeks ago, or a few days ago, what intelligence has been released confirming those allegations against the United Nations. And I haven't seen it actually put out publicly. I've seen some people talk about what it could be, the interception of phone calls, pictures, locations of where those cell phones were on certain days, things like that. But I don't think that has fully been released publicly. And I believe the rest of this video is just kind of showing the length of this tunnel, kind of moving through and through and through. It's going to be the same thing here for quite a while. Again, pretty significant, long, deep tunnel network with a lot of amenities in Khan Yunis. I think we're going to see more and more of these as the IDF continues to operate in the south. Then shifting over to Hamas, they claimed responsibility for 10 attacks over the course of the past 24 hours, all throughout Gaza. And they said that they engaged an Apache helicopter with a SAM-7. That's a surface-to-air missile 7. That's old. Now, this is all coming through translation, so it could be off. But they repeated that in multiple publications. That's like 1950s technology. It could still do the trick and could still shoot down aircraft, so I don't want to write it off entirely. It's a threat, of course. I'm not even sure that's in use like with any country, anywhere around the world. It's possible they meant SA-7, and there's just some translation stuff coming through, which Hamas does have. They have SA-7s. Hezbollah, the Houthis, a lot of these militant groups, Islamic State, have SA-7s in their arsenal. It's possible that that's what they meant. That's also a little bit old, but 1970s tech. And again, SA-7 or even the SAM-7 do pose a threat to really any helicopter in the sky. But what I've seen so far, it doesn't appear that they impacted or shot down an Israeli helicopter. Again, the Hamas statement was that they engaged, targeted, I think was the exact term they used. If they shot down a helicopter, they would have been talking more about that. So either way, I thought it was notable that they were at least talking about any sort of surface-to-air fire. And then yesterday, CNN Pentagon correspondent Haley Brisky put out a note here that I feel like is flying under the radar, and it shouldn't. not here in the United States. We should be well aware of a number like this, that 146 total U.S. casualties have occurred in Iraq, Syria, and Jordan since October. October 18th, I believe, was the first attack against U.S. forces in quite a while there. Most of these, nearly all of these, have been carried out by the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, an umbrella group for a bunch of Iranian-backed militias in the region. The breakdown provided by DoD said that 3 Americans have been KIA. Those are the 3 in Jordan. 2 very serious injuries, 9 serious injuries, and 132 non-serious injuries. And I think probably what is happening here is people look at that 132 out of the 146 and say, hey, the vast majority are not serious injuries. It could be a sprained ankle, running to a bunker when rounds are incoming. It could be minor TBI, something like that, or concussion of sorts. I don't think it matters. Like, we're fortunate that that is the case. But there are drones, missiles, and rockets. They've slowed for a little bit here, but for a long time, we're impacting American bases every single day. It was just luck of the draw and the good shooting of American air defense systems that didn't produce more significant casualties. So again, 146 total U.S. casualties just in the last few months. That is not business as usual. The U.S. bases in that region have really consistently been under attack for a long time. There's not been very long stretches without a attack carried out by the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, but the volume that has happened in the last few months is new. It's unique. It is not business as usual. Now, in looking at kind of the overview of what has taken place in that region between the United States and these Islamic Resistance in Iraq groups, looking at international intrigue here, they say there are mixed signals. On the one hand, the specific group most likely responsible for the U.S. casualties, they say Kataib Hezbollah, probably. I'll put it 80% or higher that Kataib Hezbollah is responsible. They announced last week, as we mentioned here, that they would cease attacks on U.S. forces. Right after the attack into Jordan, they just said, time out. We're actually going to sit this out. We're moving to a defensive posture. International intrigue says this is surprising because these groups typically hype up rather than play down their role, which is true. And it's notable that those attacks were claimed before the results were known, as in Islamic Resistance in Iraq talked about conducting an attack at these various locations. But then once information came out that Americans had been killed, I haven't seen anything from any one of those groups assigning responsibility or raising their hand and saying, that's us. We're the ones who finally got through and actually killed Americans. So international intrigue says this is a little bit surprising on the one hand, but not when you remember that Iran's influence over this specific group, Kataib Hezbollah, is significant. They even have an Iranian officer sitting on their group's council. That Iran has reportedly withdrawn its own senior officers from the area to minimize losses. Again, a lot of the U.S. messaging coming out before this strike, part of that was expected to have led to Iran pulling out some of their IRGC officials before the U.S. was able to conduct the retaliatory strikes. And then there have been reports recently that the Iran's Quds Force commander has been in Baghdad recently trying to talk with some of these local proxy groups to tone down their attacks. Again, this is Iran trying to figure out where that line is, how they can toe that line and make it very hard for the United States to continue operations, but not escalate this into where the United States is taking deliberate, significant action against Iran itself. Now, a big part of what goes into me putting these videos together is kind of spending the time to understand different sources. So which ones can I trust? Which ones have to come with a grain of salt? And which ones do I keep following just because they're kind of funny and they put out ridiculous stuff? I don't know if that's just me, but it's entertaining. You got to laugh every so often. So you got to find the balance. But anyways, that constantly scouring different sources I know is unrealistic for most people. You just don't have time to do that, which I think is one of the reasons that a lot of you are here, is you're trusting me to go through all of these different sources of information and kind of sift through what I think is reliable and present that in a way that's easy to understand. So for starters, thank you for being here. But in turn, I wanted to share a resource that does something pretty similar that I think you'll find pretty valuable here. And it's free, which is hard to beat. So International Intrigue is a daily newsletter, really short, like 5-minute reads put together by experts and former diplomats that can really help keep you informed around international relations, the global economy, war and conflict, and quite a bit more. So I'll pull up my most recent newsletter here. Again, it's free. Hits the inbox each morning. It's usually something I start my day with because it's something that hits on a bunch of different topics that I'm interested in and want to know more about, but don't necessarily have the time to dive into each day like I am with war and conflict in Ukraine, Israel, and elsewhere. So looking through the one here, a lot of information. There's the piece that we talked about earlier in this video. But again, just really solid resource here. They're apolitical, just lining up facts about what's happening to really try to keep us all better informed. So check out the link in the description below to sign up for the free newsletter put out by International Intrigue. Again, I really think you're going to like it. Then turning down to Yemen, where the Houthis unleashed a pretty significant missile barrage against a handful of commercial vessels in the region. And we're going to get into kind of the nature of their targets here in a second. It's very confusing, but I'll try to provide a little insight. So according to U.S. Central Command, yesterday, February 6th, the Houthis fired 6 anti-ship ballistic missiles towards the southern Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. They say 3 of those missiles were attempting to hit the MV Star Nasia, N-A-S-I-A, a Marshall Island flag Greek-owned and operated bulk carrier transiting the Gulf of Aden. That ship reported an explosion near the ship, causing minor damage but no injuries. And then another missile impacted near the ship with no effect, did not affect the ship after that detonation. A few hours later, the USS Laboon operated in the area, intercepted and shot down a 3rd ballistic missile fired by the Houthis. They say that ship, the MV Star Nasia, which I'm probably not saying correctly, remains seaworthy and is continuing its course. The remaining 3, remember there are 6 total anti-ship ballistic missiles fired. The remaining 3, the U.S. Central Command says, were likely targeting the MV Morning Tide, a Barbados-flagged, UK-owned cargo ship operating in the southern Red Sea. Those 3 missiles impacted the water near the ship without effect. The Morning Tide is continuing its journey and reporting no injuries or damage. The positive news here, if we're going to try to take something away from this, is even when the missiles and drones are impacting, which is rare given the volume that have been fired, I haven't heard of any deaths or significant injuries. Again, that's something that as soon as that starts to happen, no matter who it is, no matter who, what country they are a citizen of, it starts to change the dynamic in this conflict. Right now, lobbing missiles, as bad as it is and how much of an impact it's having on international shipping, when they're lobbing missiles and drones and they miss, it's very, very different from if, let's say, they sink one of these ships, or if they strike home and kill some of the crew members on board. Now, yesterday I talked about a statement put out by National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby, where he said that 2/3 of the ships that the Houthis are targeting are not owned by the United States or the United Kingdom, which I think is probably more than that. We'll pull up a graphic here put together by Intel Schizo. And this is where you get into this kind of complicated nature of, are the Houthis doing what they're saying they're doing? Or are they just slinging missiles and drones at everything that comes by? And it's kind of a mix of both at this point. Again, I stand by the fact that, or my belief, personal belief here, is that the Houthis, to a degree, are carrying out these attacks because of what is happening in Gaza, just because that's what they keep talking about. And the one time that they weren't doing it to this degree was during the ceasefire. I also think there are other aspects at play here. It is not exclusively the war in Gaza. But what they always talk about is only targeting Israeli, British, and American ships. And that's just not the case. We've seen some where it's been an Israeli business owner sitting on the board of directors for one of these ships, and that was enough for the Houthis to check the box and say there's enough of an Israeli connection there. But the reason I said that this is complicated is if you just looked at the ownership of these ships, that's different from where the ship is flagged, and that's different from where the ship is operated. So you got 3 different entities already, and even if none of those line up with the United States, the United Kingdom, or Israel, the Houthis supposedly are also targeting ships that are headed to or from Israeli ports, and that are carrying or moving to and from U.S. or U.K. ports. So it's just, there's a lot of different areas where the Houthis could check that box and say that ship had American goods on it or is headed for an American market, we're going to target it. So again, when you're looking at the ownership, who owns and operates these ships, where they're flagged, well more than 2/3 are not connected at all to the United States, United Kingdom, or Israel. But when you get down into those weeds of, is there any ownership or connection at all, I think that's where you start to see a lot more that technically fit this very loose, given criteria that the Houthis have put forward. Then earlier today, the Lebanese newspaper Al Akhbar published what they say was the text of Hamas's ceasefire proposal. There's a lot here. I think a lot of it is important. I'm going to try to pull out just a few pieces so I'm not just reading this thing for the next 15 minutes, I'm going to put the link in the description below to this article if you want to go check it out in its entirety. But what they say, the main points of the proposal in brief: the cessation of military activity in preparation for the complete cessation and the withdrawal of IDF forces to the surrounding areas. They say a 135-day ceasefire in 3 stages of 45 days each, during which all of the Israeli abductees, so the hostages taken from Israel by Hamas, and the bodies of the Israelis in the Gaza Strip will be released in exchange for the Palestinian prisoners and bodies held by Israel. They say they will prevent Jews from entering the Temple Mount and returning the situation on the Mount to what it was before 2002. And fourth, the restoration of the Gaza Strip and international guarantees. There's a lot of details here, and some of these I thought were worth pulling out because I think it kind of gives you an idea of what Hamas is going for here, which my reading of this is Hamas is presenting to Israel kind of like terms of surrender and defeat. Hamas is again, my read of this is that they are dictating like the surrender terms for Israel and telling them what they now will do to make this all right. I don't know that that's an accurate read of the situation right now. So to me, this seems a little bit dead on arrival, but either way, let's jump into it. They call for a complete and mutual cessation of military activity in the Strip, including air activity, the withdrawal of IDF forces from the inhabited areas of the Gaza Strip to the borderline as it was on October 6th. So IDF forces completely out of Gaza entirely. They want the release of all Israeli abductees under the age of 19, as well as the elderly and sick whose names were previously agreed upon in exchange. So the Israeli abductees, those that are taken hostage by Hamas under the age of 19, as well as the elderly and the sick, will be released in exchange for all of the Palestinian prisoners imprisoned in Israel who are younger than 19 or older than 50, as well as the sick, in addition to 1,500 Palestinian prisoners named by Hamas. That's a lot. It's also not all, which has at one point been Hamas's statement, was all Palestinian prisoners held by Israel to be released. Technically, this number is less than that. Could be a sign of some sort of negotiation there. They say completing the steps necessary to ensure that the prisoners who are released for the offenses for which they were imprisoned are not rearrested. I don't know how you do that. That one I read and I thought that is tricky. How do you grant that sort of perpetual amnesty for anyone, for anything? I don't even know, like, whether or not Israel wants to do that. I don't know how that goes about in practice. They say preventing Jews from entering Al-Aqsa and restoring the situation to what it was before 2002. They want the introduction of a minimum of 500 aid trucks per day into the Strip, including fuel. And this is where we get into Hamas kind of dictating that Israel will make right what happened through this war and essentially rebuild and reconstruct Gaza on their terms. They say the opening of all Gaza crossings for the movement of people and goods without restrictions, including the departure of men, women, and children for treatment outside of Gaza without any restrictions. It's hard to see right now that Israel is going to say, in any degree, open up the borders, let anybody come and go as needed. I don't know that the security concerns are anywhere near resolved enough for Israel to agree to that. Hamas says the supply of heavy engineering equipment for clearing rubble, equipment for civil defense, and equipment for the Ministry of Health will be provided. They asked for the rehabilitation of hospitals and bakeries in the entire Strip and the bringing in of equipment needed to set up residential camps, including 60,000 temporary residential buildings at a rate of 15,000 per week, and the introduction of 200,000 tents at a rate of 50,000 per week. Again, the way I'm reading this is these are the asks of Israel. These are not, hey, UN or international community or anyone, this is what we need. This is dictating to Israel the terms of this ceasefire. You will do this in exchange for us to stop fighting. They asked for approval of a comprehensive plan for the rehabilitation of all residential buildings, commercial buildings, and public buildings that were destroyed as a result of the fighting within a practical schedule of 3 years. They want the renewal of all humanitarian aid provided to the residents of the Gaza Strip, and especially the functioning of UNRWA as it was before October 7th, and supplying the diesel needed to operate the power plant in Gaza and needed for all sectors in the Gaza Strip. Again, I think it's interesting. There's a lot of details here. I'll put the link again in the description below if you want to read through all of it, because this is like maybe half of the asks. I just wanted to pull out some that I thought were notable. It is hard to look at this and think that Israel is going to agree to this right now. If Hamas put this forward in the hopes that it gets approved, I think it's a misread of the situation. Maybe this is. It's also interesting because we're not at the start point for negotiations. These have been going on for some time. So this wouldn't be like the first proposal, right? In some sort of negotiation where the two sides go to their extremes and then kind of move back in. That's been happening. So anyways, wanted to present this. I thought it was interesting, the Hamas version of what would be necessary for a ceasefire to take place. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out my Substack. Link is in the description below. We're putting out multiple articles a week now that I think are complementary to the topics I'm talking about in this video. The one today was diving into Iran's issue with Afghanistan, the kind of security issues domestically that Iran is facing. I think it's pretty interesting. It's all free for what it's worth. So if interested in that, be sure to check it out. The link in the description below. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.